Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the first webinar in the Quest webinar series, 2016, called Advancing Smart Energy Communities in New Brunswick. I'd like to welcome today our speaker. Today we will be joined by Sean Fleming with Solar Global Solutions. And I don't have your bio in front of us, but Sean, you've been involved with the Quest New Brunswick caucus for about a year or two, and this is an opportunity to share some of your thoughts around solar and microgrid in this area. I'm going to pass control to you.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Eddie. Show my screen.
For participants, Sean, sorry, just before we start, for folks who are new on the GoTo platform, you all have a dashboard in which you can select your audio settings. You can ask questions or comments using the dialog box, and we'll be monitoring those and respond to those. And we'll be unmuting participants toward the end for some Q&A and just some dialogue. All right, Sean.
Okay, so is everyone looking at the Solar Global Solutions logo here, the white background, or are you looking at my desktop background?
We see your presentation. You're good to go.
Okay, very good. All right, so we'll just start things off with a quick introduction to Solar Global Solutions, some projects that we've worked on here in Atlantic Canada, give you a flavor of what's going on in solar, talk a little bit about industry trends and some challenges with solar, and where that leaves the microgrid space, and our vision for distributed generation of the future. So what does Solar Global Solutions do? We're a solar company based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, actively involved in New Brunswick as well on a number of different opportunities, grid-tied systems to off-grid solar projects as well. So we specialize in net zero buildings, utility, commercial, and residential solar systems. We do EPC services for solar projects, so that's engineering, procurement, and construction services. Our start into the solar industry was actually in off-grid, so we offer a line of lighting equipment there, power generation, instrumentation, telecom equipment, and traffic signaling off-grid lighting equipment. Services, so we've got some monitoring control capabilities, so monitoring systems remotely, installation and maintenance service from our techs, and some contractor training as well. So just a bit about the company. So we're up to over 500 systems installed globally now. It is part of the Cartmill group of companies, including LED roadway lighting and C-Therm technologies based in Fredericton. Mostly an export-focused business. About 80% of our systems are installed outside of Canada. And we're actually a technology company as well. So the bottom picture there is our own charge controller, which is the interface between a solar panel and a battery. So that's a 20-year design life product with integrated wireless monitoring control technology as well. So we'll just talk quickly about a number of different projects, commercial and residential applications, different mounting technologies, so you can get a flavor of some of the different projects that are going on. So at the community level, this is West Street Fire Station in Halifax, Nova Scotia. This is a 13.4 kilowatt commercial solar photovoltaics installation. So our company specializes in PV, solar PV or photovoltaics. So these aren't the solar hot water systems. These are producing electricity. So we did the full EPC services for this project. And this is it's a flat roof mounted system. So this is how the majority of commercial solar installs are done. And it's what's called a ballasted flat roof rack. So the solar panels don't actually penetrate into the roof of the building, so there's no voiding the roof warranty. They actually float on the concrete ballast that you can see in that image there. And that system has full monitoring software. I mentioned the monitoring services earlier as well. So you can actually log online and see what that system's doing on any given day, historical data, live payback, all that sort of thing. This is a residential system. So that's a 17 kilowatt residential system. It's a ground mount, so there wasn't enough room on the roof space to go after the system size this gentleman was looking for. ground-mounted system. Again, this is a ballasted design, and the system uses microinverters. So on the previous project, all those solar panels were tied into one large central inverter. In this project, all those individual panels have their own microinverter on the back of them that are producing AC power into the electrical grid. So you're looking across Halifax Harbour here. This is in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Again, another project with the city. It's a 12.2 kilowatt commercial system. This is a flush roof mount. So this is typically how most residential projects, for example, would be installed, where it's actually the solar panels are mounted directly into the beams of the house or into the beams of the roof structure, and it's just flush with the roof itself. And again, that system also has monitoring software, so you can log on and see what's going on in that system at any one time. So we'll just take a look at some of the trends in the solar industry, and we'll take it from a global, national, and a regional perspective in terms of costing as well as adoption rates. So solar PV is really one of the most rapidly growing, and actually in most jurisdictions, the fastest growing energy source. In most jurisdictions, it still represents a small amount of the total energy generation, but growing very quickly. So this is the global installed capacity of solar photovoltaics broken out by region. So you can see that Europe is still the leader in this in terms of total installed capacity, representing over 50% of the total capacity in the world. But other jurisdictions around the world, the Americas, China, are growing. Their rate of growth is much faster. So Canada typically gets a bad rap on, people say, well, it's, we've got poor winters here. What happens? Is solar actually viable here? So take a look at what's called a CARTS map, and these are published by Natural Resources Canada. And what a CARTS map is, it tells you how many kilowatt hours of energy do I get for each kilowatt of installed solar photovoltaics. This isn't meant to be, a detailed proposal type of map. This is more to give you a general sense of how do I compare different regions globally or nationally in terms of the performance of a solar photovoltaic system. So in New Brunswick, you'd be looking at somewhere in the range of 1,100 to 1,200 kilowatt hours per kilowatt of installed solar photovoltaic. So how does that compare to Germany, the world leader in solar PV? Well, on an annual basis their systems are only producing somewhere in the range of 800 to 1,000 kilowatt hours per kilowatt, depending on location. So in actual fact, even after snow loading and all this type of thing, the resource, even here in Atlantic Canada, is about 25% better in terms of energy generation annually than it is in Germany. So that really gives you a sense of the amount of potential for solar energy in Canada. You start to look at places like southern Ontario, the prairies, and they have significantly larger solar resources. But even here in Atlantic Canada, and again, this is after snow loading, snow losses, all that sort of thing, you're still looking at about 20 to 25% better yield than you would have for an equivalent solar system in Germany. So, solar is definitely a viable option here in Canada, and we'll go into some of the costing trends and adoption rates next. So this is the adoption rate in green. The bar chart there is the adoption rate for solar PV in Canada, and the yellow line there, the declining line, is the cost of the solar panels over the same time period. So this is 2000 to 2014, and you'll see that the shape of the adoption curve for solar in Canada is very similar to what we looked at the global context. It's growing exponentially, and a lot of that's being driven by the rapid cost reduction in solar panels. And prices of inverters and racking and labor are all coming down as well, but it's really the solar panels that are driving it. So from 2000 to 2014, ballpark numbers, in 2000 you would have been paying about $1 a watt for a solar panel. In 2014, about $11 a watt in the year 2000, down to $1 a watt in 2014. So just massive cost reductions, and that's really what's driving the global adoption trends, along with regional incentives that some governments have put in place to allow that sort of adoption. So for example, in Canada, the lion's share of that installed capacity is in Ontario, where they did have and do have feed-in tariffs to assist the adoption of solar. So what's going on in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia? So similar graphs here. The dark blue bar graph, that's the installed capacity of solar photovoltaics in Nova Scotia over the last decade, 2004 to 2014. And the red line is the installed capacity of solar photovoltaics in New Brunswick over the same time period, 2004 to 2014. And these were generated with data from the respective utilities. So the line graph there are the electricity rates over the same time period. So you can see that the electricity cost in Nova Scotia is significantly more expensive than it is in New Brunswick, and especially starting around 2010, you really start to see a more pronounced divergence between the two electricity rates. And I think it's no surprise that around the same time, you really see the more rapid adoption of solar PV in Nova Scotia. And it's being driven by the economics associated with the higher electricity rates in Nova Scotia rather than New Brunswick. But in New Brunswick, it's a growing technology as well, and certainly announcements like the Smart Grid Innovation Network yesterday. That sort of infrastructure is what allows solar to grow in a sustainable way and be integrated with other technologies like battery storage, which we'll talk about in a bit as well. So actually pricing on batteries, one of the things with solar energy, it's not sunny all the time. So how do you help manage some of that variability? Battery storage is always what is looked to. So this is a graph for the projected battery costs published by the Rocky Mountain Institute. The Rocky Mountain Institute is a renewable energy research institute and think tank based out of Colorado. And what they've collected was some of the data from 2010 and projections out to 2050. The interesting thing about this graph was that they published this in early 2015, and in the spring of 2015, Tesla made their announcement about their Powerwall pack. And their announcement actually came in, the pricing they announced came in significantly below where most experts were predicting the price of batteries to go. So what we're seeing here is that the price declines on battery technology are more rapid than what most experts have been predicting, and that battery technology is probably in the same place where solar photovoltaics was 6 years ago or so, where maybe it's not quite economic yet, but it's rapidly getting to that point. So where do we see the change in buildings and consumer habits moving to? So we see moving from just consumers of electricity to prosumers, so producers and consumers of electricity. So this could be a commercial building or a residential property with solar photovoltaics on the roof. There's battery storage in the basement of the electrical room, and they're still tied into the electrical grid. I think it's very unlikely, cost reasons and reliability reasons, that customers will choose to go completely off-grid. I think the grid is always going to be there, an important part of the energy infrastructure. But when you start installing distributed systems like this, it is important to have them connected to the grid and have a way to manage and control them appropriately. So we'll talk a little bit about the costs associated with solar, payback, and financing, because that's really one of the most interesting aspects as the business cases around solar as well. So what does the average home use? So new home construction in New Brunswick, typically those homes would consume about 10 to 12 megawatt hours of electricity per year. For older homes, that number would be larger certainly, and more comparable to a non-electrically heated home in the traditional sense. So in a new home, what does 10 to 12 megawatt hours mean in terms of cost? Well, based on that CARTS map I was showing you earlier, you need about a 10 kilowatt solar system in order to completely zero that electrical bill over the course of the year. And of course, you don't have to install a solar system that completely zeroes the electrical bill, but just to give you some ballpark figures here, what's the installed cost of a 10 kilowatt system? At today's prices, in the range of about $30,000 to $35,000 installed cost. So what does that mean for payback? Well, like I was showing on the graph earlier, the electricity rates really do have an effect on customer demand for different technologies, but they also affect the economics of these systems as well. So in Nova Scotia, for example, an equivalent solar system, a 10 kilowatt solar system, depending on how electricity prices change over the next 25 years, the payback's going to be somewhere in the range of about 13 to 15 years. In New Brunswick, the electricity rates are significantly lower at the residential level, so that pushes out the payback for these systems. Again, a system that costs the same amount up front, in New Brunswick, it's going to pay back in about 16 to 20 years, again, depending on how the electricity prices change over the next 25 years. So taking a look at the levelized cost of electricity. So what is the levelized cost of electricity? Well, that's a metric that's used to analyze essentially the life cycle cost of electricity. So I bought capital equipment for a fossil fuel plant. I need to fuel that. There's operation and maintenance costs associated with it. So all the costs over the lifetime of the power plant divided by all the electricity that it can produce. So what's happening to the levelized cost of electricity? It's going down quite significantly for solar, both at the residential level and at the commercial industrial level. So 2014, 2015, it is in the range life cycle cost of, say, for 2015, around 16 to 22 cents a kilowatt hour. So that would then be compared to what's the life cycle cost of electricity from the grid. It's 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour now, and it's inflating at X% per year. And over that 25-year period, what would the cost of electricity be? So it is declining rapidly for solar photovoltaics, and most of this is coming from the decline in equipment costs. So certainly the capital cost is one of the challenging aspects of solar photovoltaics. For a 10 kilowatt system, like we were talking earlier, like I said, somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $35,000 installed. So how can customers help mitigate some of those upfront costs? And financing is really the tool that's being used to relieve some of those capital cost challenges. And you're seeing that from a number of different entities, which is interesting, from private companies to municipalities and even utilities as well. So Solarcity is a company based in the U.S. that does residential and commercial solar systems. They offer 30-year loans with relatively low interest rates of 4.5% to 5% over that period. And those can be either financed or leased for your solar system. Even from the municipal level, you're starting to see the adoption of PACE financing. So that's property assessed clean energy financing. And it allows municipalities to give loans to residents where they pass on the city's ability to borrow money at a low cost to residential customers. So Halifax actually launched a program for this for solar hot systems, and has now announced the second phase of it for solar photovoltaic systems. And what they're doing is providing financing for a 10-year period at a fixed interest rate of 3.5% to help users adopt clean technology without actually, while reducing some of those capital costs. So one of the important things to note here is, when you're looking at Halifax or even municipal utilities like ENMAX, they're not actually subsidizing the solar systems or providing, or a rebate on them. they're just financing the equipment. But even that is enough to really drive the adoption of those technologies. So utilities that are interested in this as well, the municipal utility in Calgary, NMAX, also has a solar leasing and financing program that they've launched, which you can get a 15-year lease on your solar equipment and then purchase it out at the end as well. So interesting to see all these different entities getting involved in this, basically recognizing that capital costs are the major challenge when it comes to renewables, and trying to put in place some tools to help the residential and small business customers deal with that. So there are some challenges with solar, and we'll talk a little bit about that and where microgrids can play in to help relieve some of those challenges. So the solar market in Atlantic Canada is relatively immature in comparison to other jurisdictions around the world. And one of the benefits that gives us is it allows us to take a look at, what are some lessons learned from these other markets? What challenges have they encountered? So taking a look at California in particular, California is one of the leaders in the adoption of solar technology, but it is creating some issues for their utilities. So this is what's called the duck curve, and it's published by the California ISO, which is the utility operator in California. So what this graph is, it's the net load on the utility. The net load on the utility by hours per day. And California used to have a mild hump in the middle of the day, and it was air conditioning loads. But the rapid adoption of solar has really flattened out that demand in the middle of the day. And they're projecting that down to 2020, the adoption of solar is going to significantly reduce the need for their traditional generated electricity. So these are your hydros, your coals, your nuclears in the middle of the day. The problem for the utility is that the peak hasn't changed at all. So the peak's still projected to be around 7, 8 p.m. at night. These are, people have finished up dinner, they're putting on dishwashers or doing laundry, things like that. And now the utility has to compensate for that. And they either have to have new thermal generating stations to be able to compensate for that peak, or figure out some way to perhaps store the energy in the middle of the day and then discharge it at night. So in New Brunswick, there's a similar thing of an evening peak. There's also a morning peak as well, similar to what we have here in Nova Scotia. But even in both those situations, you can appreciate that the energy production of solar doesn't necessarily line up when customers are using electricity. So this is why it becomes important with the rapid rise of solar and its adoption that both customers and utilities sort out ways to manage that electricity and to more or less align it with customer demand, because that's what really reduces the cost of generating overall. So what are some of the things that can help you do that? Well, certainly battery storage is one of them. So, really the three key components in a microgrid are solar photovoltaics, battery storage, and then some sort of thermal generating ability as well, whether that's traditional generators or a combined heat and power generator. But battery storage is really what will allow utilities and users to move around their energy production from their solar panels to better align with the energy demand, which is in the morning and evening. So the batteries allow you to store the power. There's a number of different technologies out there. The ones that we focus on are lithium ion and lead acid. Absorbed glass mat is a type of lead acid battery, a sealed lead acid battery, and it really depends on the application as to which technology you would choose. So today, say for a residential customer, for example, for a residential customer that's looking for backup power, then a lead acid battery is probably the best choice. They're not going to cycle the battery very often because the grid's quite reliable. So in that case, some of the advantages of lithium aren't being utilized. But for example, let's say your battery was a utility battery that New Brunswick Power was going to be cycling on and off during the day to help level the load on the grid, or a battery in a commercial setting that was being used to mitigate demand charges. So it was being turned on at the same time as large machinery to help mitigate some of those power draws. It was going to be cycled heavily. In that case, we'd go with lithium-ion batteries. They have a much higher cycle life, lower maintenance, but they do have an added cost. So combined heat and power generators. So what is a CHP generator? Well, it is a traditional generator, an internal combustion engine, except that it has a heat recovery loop on the engine casing and exhaust jacket. And what that does is, when there's a heat demand in the building, whether that's residential or commercial, this generator turns on, it produces electricity, and one of the byproducts of producing that electricity is the heat. And that heat is then captured to do either space heating or domestic hot water. So this type of technology is relatively new to Canada. Ontario and Alberta are leading the way on the adoption of CHP technology, but this is very common in Europe, the UK, and Japan to install these types of systems. And some of the benefits of these are that they can be deployed locally, so in a building, to provide resiliency, because it is a generator on site, and it helps provide secure power and secure heating to a facility. And we're just in the middle of our first net zero building in Nova Scotia that's using solar technology, battery storage, and combined heat and power. And it's doing that in order to reduce the cost of that facility, the First Nations band office, but also to provide an emergency response center for the community. So that building actually has a secure power panel with all their critical loads on it, heating, refrigeration, lighting, and telecommunications. And that's connected to the battery bank and the CHP generator, so that in the event that the power does go down, that electrical panel is still able to operate and provide those critical circuits with power in the event of an emergency. So battery storage and CHP are really, they're complementary technologies to solar photovoltaics, and they're really what allow you to help mitigate problems like the duct curve. So for example, we'll just jump back to this slide. In the middle of the day, instead of using the solar to export onto the grid and to reduce the demand for the traditional generation, that solar energy could be stored in batteries, and then at the peak demand at the end of the day, those batteries could be discharged into the grid or into the building to help mitigate that large spike in demand. And the CHP generators can be used in a similar way. Certainly they can't be used to store energy, but they can be turned on demand. So they can be turned on, say, at the end of the day for the evening peak, or in the morning for the morning peak, and help mitigate some of the demand spikes then as well. So those are really the three components for the microgrid. And the microgrid can be looked at from either a building perspective or a community perspective, but it's all about proper power management for both the end user as well as how that system is going to interact with the utility. So for microgrids, you're looking at solar PV, battery storage, and CHP generators. Where are the real applications for this type of technology? Certainly first responders, military applications. The U.S. Department of Defense is moving in this direction for all of their bases now, that they need to have combinations of solar PV and diesel generator backup. And the reason being that in the event of emergency, they need to be able to island themselves from the traditional grid. So they're moving towards microgrids for that. Hospitals, so places that are already installing traditional generators. A traditional generator, there's no payback on a traditional generator. It just sits there and waits for a power outage. With a CHP unit, there's a payback associated with that, depending on your heating load, and you're able to use that as the generator when needed as well. Certainly, remote communities, so in northern parts of the province or in even northern parts of the country, it's not sunny all the time, but a combination of PV, batteries, and the generator system can provide microgrid and energy security to these remote communities as well. We talked a little bit about commercial settings with demand charge management for batteries. The other really important aspect for commercial users is energy security as well. So, you think of large industrial or commercial users that, they've got, electronics, electronic printing machines, SMT machines. Lost time, lost productivity is extremely expensive. So the ability to island yourself from a power outage and reduce lost time and waste is very important in the commercial industrial sector. So there's certainly a great application for microgrids and university and college campuses as well. There's a network of buildings there that can be connected and the energy system managed there to provide increased security as well as to reduce costs, the operation and maintenance costs of those facilities. So where do we see solar and microgrids going in the future? Well, I think like I said earlier in the presentation that things like the Smart Grid Innovation Network, they're really the building blocks to be able to allow you to adopt renewable energy and microgrid technology in a way that is beneficial to both the utility and to the end user itself. So we see these systems actually being connected in with the utility system through something like the Siemens Integrated Load Management System, and that networks of these either residential systems with batteries or, say, commercial microgrids could be used in conjunction with the utility's existing assets, their wind farms, their nuclear plants, or their hydro facilities, as another asset on the grid. And the objective is to really level the load and reduce the cost of electricity and the cost of producing electricity for all users. So that's really where we see these systems going, is both beneficial to the end user in terms of reducing their costs, providing energy security on site, but also a benefit to the utility in that these assets can be used to help manage overall variability on the grid. So that concludes my presentation for today. Be happy to answer any questions and turn it over to the audience for some discussion.
Great, thanks very much, Sean. That's a very excellent presentation. I'll do that in just a moment. I'll open up the lines for folks who have questions. I thought that it was very interesting to get the data around the cost and the demand for solar globally, and looking at New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and its potential here. I want to start with one question. What is your thoughts around adoption of solar and microgrid technology in Atlantic Canada? And the SGIN is perhaps one of the things that will lead to more integration. But at the community level, where do you see this going?
Well, I think I think the 80 megawatts of community renewables that have been announced by the provinces is very interesting and very promising for microgrid technology. So, I think there's two ways that 80 megawatts could be approached. So, it could be approached from a traditional renewables perspective, and the cheapest way to produce 80 megawatts of renewables is probably to put up one 80 megawatt wind farm. But there's an ability here to actually break that 80 megawatts into separate community systems, into community microgrids that can provide some additional benefits to the utility in terms of helping them balance loads, because maybe there's battery storage or something involved with those as well, but actually provide some additional benefits to the community. So they're getting the traditional benefits from owning that renewable energy system. I'm sure there's some sort of power purchase agreement will come out of that, but maybe that battery storage system also provides them with some community-based resiliency as well in the event of a power outage. So in the short term, I think the 80 megawatts of renewables that's been announced for the province of New Brunswick, I think that's the best opportunity to really be a world leader in. You could have 80 megawatts of distributed microgrids throughout the province under that program, and I think that would be a fantastic start to leveraging the work that New Brunswick Power and Siemens has done to help control some of these systems and just deploy renewables in a productive and sustainable way.
Oh, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Okay, now I will open it up for any questions or comments from folks on the line. So if you are joining us today, it may get a little noisy for a moment, but if I could just ask if there are questions from folks on the line. You've covered all the bases. And as per our meeting yesterday, the chickens are happy. Oh yes, yes. As long as the farmer and the chickens have their heat and power, and then we've accomplished what we set out to do. So this is the last call for questions or comments for Sean Fleming. As we get serenaded. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you without further ado, Sean, for joining us today for the Quest webinar series and sharing your perspectives with us on solar and microgrid trends. And I certainly think, oh, look, a question's come in. I'll just, I see Dan would like to ask a question. Dan, are you there? Dan, can you hear us? Well, he may be able to hear us, but he can't speak. If he has a question, he can put that into the dialog box. Without further ado, though, Sean, I want to thank you for joining us today. And if folks would like to get a hold of Sean Fleming, you can certainly reply to the webinar invite. Or Sean, do you have a contact available? Hi, Sean. There.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll send my contact details along, and feel free to circulate that with the group. And if any